Today is the 1 year anniversary of the PlayStation 5. Well, if you're in the UK anyway. It came out a tiny bit later for us on November 19th, and it's amazing to think that it's been a whole year since this console originally came out. And I've been really impressed with the device, considering we are only in its first year. I think a lot of the momentum came early, I will say. I remember my initial reaction to owning it was really, really strong. And there have been some great games since, like Ratchet and Clank and Returnal, but I do feel as if there's been a little bit of a mellowing out in terms of the content we've been getting. In some respect, I think that largely feels the case because Horizon Forbidden West has been pushed into next year. For me, though, that's not such a bad thing because I'm finding outside of PlayStation, there are a lot of games coming out right now, and I don't know if I would have had time to have played all of them. So for me, the fact it's coming out next year isn't the end of the world, but it has created this feeling for me that PlayStation 5 had this really strong start, and it is settling a little bit. But the important thing to remember is that just because games aren't constantly coming out doesn't mean that those old games have suddenly evaporated, right? Miles Morales is still a fantastic, fun game to play, and it should still be a reason to go out and get a PlayStation 5. But, going out and getting a PlayStation 5 is much easier said than done. In fact, it's quite remarkable because I remember this time last year thinking that it was really hard to get a PS5 for those who hadn't pre-ordered. But I did say to a lot of people, look, don't worry, PlayStation 4 was exactly the same. If you missed the pre-order on launch, it was very tricky to get one, but after about 4 months, it became relatively easy. I remember easily buying my PlayStation 4, again, about 4 months after launch. But now we're a year on, and it's still very hard to find a PlayStation 5. We are extremely far from just walking into a shop and being able to find it in stock. And even going online, if you just choose a random point in the day to check Argos or Game or Very, and you want to see do they have a PS5 available, it's almost certainly no. So you really have to keep an eye out for those stock alerts if you really want any chance of getting a PS5 anywhere other than the scalper, which I tend to advise against just because you don't have the same buyer's protection, and of course you're going to be paying a little bit more. So I do think it's worth waiting to get it for the correct retail price and to get that peace of mind, just that you're getting it from a reputable retailer, or maybe if you know a friend who's willing to sell it to you, and if they sell you a Duff unit, at least you know them personally. But yeah, it's fair to say it's a tricky situation, and there are reasons for this. Of course, there's the chip shortage, which is affecting really all of electronics. It's not just gaming, it's laptops, even cars, anything that really relies on these specific components that are struggling to reach the necessary destinations in the supply chain. Anything that's impacted by that is having some real supply constraints and issues, and Sony just can't meet demand right now with the PlayStation 5. And it's not just the PlayStation 5, it's the same deal with the Xbox Series X, and I think even the Nintendo Switch. It's a situation where demand is absolutely outstripping supply. It's quite interesting. So when I talk about the PlayStation 5 and how good it is, because I do find it to be a fantastic device, at the same time I'm kind of conscious that even if I convince someone that this is worth buying, you're in a situation where buying one isn't so easy. So I am cognizant of that, but equally it feels very fitting to talk about the PS5 now. And also what I've done is I got a new capture card, because for all the time I've owned the PlayStation 5, my previous capture card did not work with it. Whatever I tried just could not get the signal to come through, which is interesting because it worked on my Switch, it worked on my Series X, but for whatever reason, I don't quite understand, PS5 just wasn't having any of it. So I've given my capture card a bit of an upgrade, and while you're still going to get 1080p gameplay, mostly because I just can't handle the storage of 4K, you should see a little bit of an improvement, particularly when it comes to the colours. I noticed on my last uploads of some gameplay, there was definitely some desaturation of the colours, which wasn't supposed to be there. It was a lot clearer on the original TV when I was playing it, so hopefully that will also fix that. So I've kind of killed two birds with one stone. Should get better capture quality from all of my devices, but Also, importantly, I can actually get capture footage from the PlayStation 5 without having to rely on the share button. And I did one video with that, and I really wasn't happy with the compression. You could see lots of artifacting and stuff. It wasn't ideal. So what do I like most about the PlayStation 5? Like, what's number one? And at the end of the day, it's a selection of games. You've got great third-party support. I can't really think of any major third-party games that have skipped the PlayStation 5. At worst, you might get a situation where there's only a PlayStation 4 version, and therefore you end up playing the PlayStation 4 version on the PlayStation 5 and not taking full advantage of the new hardware, but at the end of the day, you can still play the game. And you often get some passive boosts like the SSD boost when you do that. So the selection of third-party games is fantastic, and to be fair, that's nothing new for PlayStation. They've always been really strong on that front. But also, of course, there have been some great first-party titles as well. I think if we're counting all games that have come out since the release, just my personal top picks would still have to be Miles Morales. It is a short game, but the quality and the gameplay are out of this world. Returnal, just because of how, I don't want to say unique, because it's obviously not a completely unique experience, but it does feel very different for a high-profile Sony game, and I really enjoyed it. When I tried to go back and play it again, I forgot it was also very challenging. It's definitely a game you get into the flow of, and if you go away and come back to it, you can find yourself losing it. And also, they've made it a little bit easier as well, because they added the ability to save mid-run, which when I finished it, you couldn't do that. So that's making the game a lot more appealing. So Returnal, also great. And also Ratchet and Clank. I love Ratchet and Clank. Graphically speaking, just astonishing. And the fact you're given options like the full 4K mode with ray tracing, albeit at 30 FPS, and then the 60 FPS mode, a bit of a lower resolution and no ray tracing, and then the, well, considerably lower resolution but 60 FPS and ray tracing mode, really make it come together to be a game that looks great to anyone's taste, which is fantastic. And, you know, there's other games like Deathloop and Kenna Bridge of Spirits, really all ranging from good to phenomenal, in my opinion. Just some naturally are going to be better than others. The only thing I guess you might say is we haven't had, in my opinion, of course, the ultimate example of a AAA Sony title just yet. The closest thing is, in my opinion, Miles Morales, but it's too short for me to consider it like in the same vein as Spider-Man 2018. I think when we get Horizon Forbidden West, that is going to be the most impressive thing you can get on a PlayStation. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's great to have it on the horizon. But what we have now is a really strong lineup of games, and I can always boot up my PS5 and find something good to play. But then if we're talking about what's great about the PlayStation 5, there's also the hardware. Of course, it's a really big jump on the PlayStation 4 Pro, which is what I previously came from. It's much quieter, though important to say, not silent. It does make weird noises, but at least they're quiet noises. I find it's kind of like a fridge. I think I've heard that comparison made before, and it does sound a bit like a fridge, but at least it's a relatively quiet fridge. You've got the massive CPU boost. The CPU on the PlayStation 4 Pro was really quite anemic, which closed it off to a lot of complex game design, but that has been massively addressed now. And the GPU has also got a considerable boost, and of course there's that formidable SSD, which allows games to load really fast, or when it's taken to its maximum advantage, you have situations where there are borderline no loading screens at all. Ratchet and Clank being a fantastic example of that, where it's a seriously seamless experience, and it really makes, you know, the immersion factor more when you're just hopping around the world without any kind of break or block. It'll be interesting to see if there's anything in the way of that used in God of War Ragnarok, because the first game was trying to get into a no-load situation even on the PS4 Pro, where it kind of hid it sometimes by having you walk across that tree when you were teleporting, but for the most part you barely saw any load times. but every now and then you would see some stuttering where the PlayStation was preparing the next scene, and I wonder if the PS5 will just essentially clean up the stuttering. The fact that we are still seeing both PS4 and PS5 titles being released means that the SSD perhaps isn't being utilised to its absolute fullest in terms of game design. Of course, when it just comes to improving loading times, it will be improved all the time, but when it comes to actually designing a game with the consideration that there are no loading times, we won't see a lot of that until we start to move away from having PS4 games released as well. And I've heard a lot of people get quite aggressive about this and getting frustrated, saying, I've bought a PlayStation 5, why can't I get purely next-gen experiences? And obviously I feel a bit of that myself as well, but I'm also sympathetic to those who don't have a PlayStation 5 yet when it's so hard to get one. So I kind of rein in my outrage a little bit because of that factor, which I think is quite important to consider. But I do at the same time look forward to when the PlayStation 5 is unleashed, so to speak. You've also got the DualSense controller, of course, and it's interesting how my opinion on this has refined over the course of a year. This was a very hyped feature of the PlayStation 5 when it was coming out, and my opinion is this: I do appreciate the haptics in the controller, both for immersion, but also because the motors are much smaller. When you're having really intense vibrations, it doesn't make so much of a noise. Like, I find my Xbox controller, just for a quick comparison, it sounds very loud when it's vibrating, but the PlayStation 5, unless it's intentionally trying to create that effect, is generally quite quiet when it vibrates. So that's quite a nice quality of life thing. One thing I will be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of are the adaptive triggers. So this can be used to simulate tension when you're pulling back a bowstring, or maybe just the resistance of a trigger on a gun, or even in a driving game. Sometimes it can be used to create the impact of, you're really wrestling to get over a road. The thing is with this, sometimes it is used really well, really effectively. Dirt 5 would be my personal favourite example of this. Also, I think the bow in Ghost of Tsushima is very good. But then there are some implementations like Deathloop where I just feel like it gets in the way. Like, you're trying to fire this gun really quick and the adaptive trigger is just getting in the way of the experience, personally, is how I feel. But the thing is, you can almost always just disable the adaptive triggers if you want to. So it's an optional feature. But yeah, that's my opinion, is it can make some games feel better, but other games, honestly, it can make them feel worse when we're talking about the adaptive triggers. So I will talk about a few things I don't love about the PlayStation 5, but luckily there aren't too many. One is just the size of it. Even though in my regular gaming space it's not too much of an issue, I did take it down to my living room the other day and it was quite tricky to find a place for it, and when I did, it really stuck out like a sore thumb. And when you combine its size with its rather ostentatious design, it really draws a lot of attention to itself. And I'm just personally, I guess subjectively, of the preference that I like my technology to blend in, to be invisible and just deliver what it needs to deliver. But the PlayStation 5, it really wants to grab your attention, for better or worse, right? Some people will like that. I mean, it does certainly have a very iconic design, and I don't inherently hate the way it looks. I just find it overly distracting and quite large. Obviously, a very, very minor complaint that pales in comparisons to the positives I've listed. And another very small thing, the PlayStation 5 controller, I do find that it drains battery really quickly, which I suppose shouldn't be too much of a surprise because it has so many features embedded in it, and often the rate at which it drains will correlate to how much a game is using its features. If you have a game that's using adaptive triggers, advanced haptics, the speakers as well, then you will find that the battery can go down quite fast. So just for that reason, those might be justifications to turn off some of the features temporarily. And then finally, the first-party games are rather expensive, which is unfortunate. It is a rise on what they used to cost on the PlayStation 4. However, I think an important caveat that we must consider is that these games truly are excellent. I haven't played one of these expensive games yet that I actually regretted spending the money for. So this isn't really a complaint anyway at the moment. It's more that if they ever did give us a game that cost this much, but it wasn't of particularly good quality, I would feel very ripped off. So it's something I wanted to note, but yeah, it's not a major issue in my opinion. It does suck, of course, that it will prohibit more people from playing these games, because naturally the higher the price of the game goes, the fewer people will just play it, because some people will want to buy it because they just love the idea of the experience. Like for me, Returnal, I just thought it sounded like a really cool concept, so I was willing to pay it. But if you're on the fence on its concept and you saw that price, you might say to yourself, is it really worth it now? Just wait for the price to come down. And to be fair, often the price does come down, either be it on the PlayStation Store or if you can find a physical version, if indeed you bought the disc version of PlayStation 5, which is why I recommend to people you should try and get that version, because you open yourself up to more discounts if you can do that. So those are my anniversary thoughts on the PlayStation 5, a truly fantastic device that I hope will continue to bring me more years of fun. It'll be interesting to see if we get another mid-cycle refresh like a PlayStation 5 Pro. Not sure what the major selling point would be. Would it be 8K, or would it just be enhanced frame rates or better ray tracing? I don't know. Right now, though, I think the hardware in the PlayStation 5 is fine for the games we're getting, and I look forward to developers just taking more advantage of it than they already are. As always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.